morning bells of the high tower tolled through a wash of fog that smelled of salt and old stone, the sound coming in slow breaths, as if the tower itself were waking. Samuel Tarley held his lantern up and watched the mist take its light and make it thin and pale. He liked being alone at such hours, when the river was a black ribbon and Old Town seemed to float about him, rather than press upon him with all its stairs and rules and voices. In the rookery, the ravens rustled and rattled their beaks against the iron bars, the soft click-click like beads running through cold fingers. He moved along the row with a bowl of chopped meat, his lantern knocking gently against his knee. "Here you are," he murmured, and a large gray bird fixed him with a coin-bright eye before dipping its head to the meat. "Not so fast." Share. He had learned to talk softly to them because the rookery liked soft sounds. Hard ones went out of shape in the high stone chamber and came back barbed. They knew his voice now. When he came in at night, one or two would croak low and shake their feathers, and the rest would stir to wakefulness as if a wind had touched a field of reeds. Maester Kedry said Sam babied them, but Kedry smelled always of sour beer and impatience, and the ravens disliked him soundly. Sam could not help being pleased at that. He placed a sliver in front of a smaller black bird that had a dusting of white around its eyes like ill-applied soot. "You especially," he told it. "We'll have a letter for you soon." The bird blinked, considering whether to peck at the morsel or at his finger. It chose the meat and fluffed its neck. The lantern swung, throwing a weak ladder of light across the floor. Sam paused to breathe, to let his shoulders release. The bell finished its tolling, leaving behind a faint echo that seemed to lie in the rafters like a folded cloak. From the high window, he could see nothing but fog pressed to glass, but he imagined the honey wine below, carrying its brown water down to the whispering sound. He imagined the masts at anchor and the smoke from a dozen kitchens and forges going straight up in the calm. Old Town arranged in layers of breath, the great tower's beacon sleeping, the lantern room enclosed. It was the world in a hush, and in that hush, Sam could pretend the Citadel had no archmaesters, no keys, no iron scrutiny waiting to weigh him and find him light. He moved to the shelf where the spare jesses and rings were kept and took out the leather he had stitched the night before. His stitches were uneven but firm. He ran a thumb over them, pleased despite himself, and then set the lantern upon a block of stone while he tied the jesses to the little raven's legs. It watched him with a patient humility he found moving. "There," he said when the knots were done. "No pecking. I'm tender everywhere." Ben shout. In the round silence afterward, the glass candle in the adjoining chamber seemed to whisper. It wasn't a sound exactly, more a sensation at the back of the head, a cool finger along the nape. He turned his face toward the arch that led to the candle room. No one barred the way at this hour, but there was a chain across the arch. Not to keep him out, Hebrews had said, but to remind the unlinked that some knowledge cut more often than it healed. The candle did not burn like fire. Its light was greenish and pale, a spear of cold that made the surrounding darkness look thicker by comparison. When he had first seen it, he had wanted to reach out to cup the fire, as if it might be too fragile to bear its own strangeness. Marwyn had laughed at him then, not unkindly. "There's more bite in that light than in half the swords in this city," he had said before telling Sam that he should stop looking at it as if it might speak. "It speaks enough without your help." Marwyn had gone. The Archmaester had sailed for Slaver's Bay months ago, after leaving behind a chamber empty except for the candle and the smell of old smoke that was not smoke. Ambrose said the candle had no place in proper study. He would have had it extinguished if he had known how. But he did not know, and knowledge was always both chain and key. He instructed the novices to keep away. He did not forbid Sam from looking. Men forbid that which they fear others will love, but he discouraged him with little sighs, and with care he withheld. Sam had burned the shape of the candle's light behind his eyes nevertheless. In the library he would find it again in the wavering of a lamp against parchment, in the forge yard's embers, in the reflection off a polished bell. It was a cold light with a sound when no sound should have been, and it made him think of the other he had killed with the dragon-glass dagger, and of the scream that had been more pressure in his bones than noise in his ear, and of the moment afterward, when the world had seemed to hinge and then swing open into another shape of itself. He did not tell Ambrose what it made him think. He did not tell anyone. He kept the thought, like he kept the wrapped dagger beneath the straw mattress in the little cell he shared with Gilly and the sleeping child. Close and hidden, a warm stone under the tongue. When he finished with the ravens, he lifted the lantern and went down the broader stair, so he would not disturb the sleeping apprentices. His chain rattled scarcely at all. He had links of black iron, yellow copper, pewter, lead, and silver. He had earned steel and tin. He had not yet earned Valyrian steel, which would hang cool and dark from the chain like a sliver of night caught among lesser metals. Some days he could feel the absence like a weight. Other days he was glad not to have it dragging at his neck. The link was for the higher mysteries, Ebros said. Sam had seen the way those mysteries were spoken of, always at a distance, as if they were unruly dogs that might bite through their own leashes. The lower halls had the chill breath of cellars, and the lantern's light ran across the stone like something spilled. In the courtyard, a single boy beat out the ashes in a brazier with a piece of old sash. His breath made a cloud. In the east, the fog thinned and rose like a curtain drawn slowly back, and Sam stood a moment to watch the sky reveal itself in pale strokes. He loved mornings even when he dreaded the day. They were filled with possibilities that had not yet become disappointments. Gilly would be awake, though he had left her sleeping. She had learned to keep quiet in a city of men who frowned at the sound of a woman where a woman's voice was not expected. Sometimes Sam found her down by the river watching the boats, the child swaddled with care that was nearly ferocity. She had lost one baby to his choices. She held this one as if she could keep him in the world by force. He found her instead by the window of their cell, where a sliver of the sound was visible, if one leaned out far enough to risk falling. She held the boy upright against her shoulder, patting his back in a steady human rhythm that made sleep try to return to Sam's eyes. "You were up," she said without turning. "I heard the bells and not you. I fed the ravens." He put the lantern down and smiled when the boy, no, he must stop thinking of him as a boy with a name that was not his. This was the child of the king beyond the wall. But in their room there was only a little creature whose frown when he dreamed looked like Sam's own. When the child hiccuped into Gilly's hair, "He's got your tenacity. He's got wind." She turned then, and he saw the exhausted tenderness in her face. "He doesn't like the dark unless he can smell me." She smiled once, fleeting. "Maybe he doesn't trust the city either. He'll learn." He meant it as comfort, and for once it landed as such. She nodded and tilted the child so he could see Sam, the little mouth pursing, as if to shape a word. He was not old enough for words yet, but Sam found himself talking to him as if he understood. That was all right. He needed practice explaining things to men who did not believe. He told Gilly about the light over the sound and the gray raven's appetite, about the way fog pressed against the rookery windows, as if the sea had come to listen for secrets. She listened as she always did, with her whole face, even to the trivial. No one had listened to the trivial things he said when he was a boy, and perhaps that was why he had learned to love the details other men missed. "You'll be late," she said eventually. And Sam smiled at the absurdity. "They'll scold you." "They will," he said, "but I can bear a scolding." She nodded, her expression tightening with the worry of those who had lived without safety for too long. "Bear it then, and come back, and eat. I forgot to remind you last night." "No, Andy." "I will." He kissed her cheek, which tasted of salt, and the child's soft hair. On the way to the door, he looked at the bed and felt the ache of leaving it, although he had only just risen. In the library the day began before. The day began. Lamps burned at half fill, giving the stacks a dusky glow that fit the hour. The smell of vellum was mixed with the fainter tang of iron gall ink, and beneath them both was the stone's own smell, cold and clean if one could call stone clean, which Sam did not think one could. A new novice named Tommen, not that Tommen, had been set to boil glue, and the pot burped on a brazier in the copying room. Sam felt a pleasure that had little to do with his tasks as he walked in beneath the rose window. Books had always seemed to him like small moored boats in a vast harbor. He could move from one to another without ever being lost. And each voyage had the chance of seeing some greater thing from a new angle. His assigned reading lay where he had left it. Septon Barth's treatises, bound together in a cracked volume, the leather splitting at the spine. Ambrose had frowned at Barth. He frowned at all who let speculation go on too long without anchoring it to weight and measure. But Sam trusted Barth's plainness. Even when the Septon fell to wonder, he did it with a craftsman's hands. He understood that the world offered things that could not be weighed or measured without losing something of what made them matter. Sam eased himself onto the high stool, careful with the way the wood had a habit of complaining beneath him. He arranged paper, inkstone, quill, the little pot of sand for blotting, and then opened the Barth to the thread he had marked with a shred of linen. There it lay again, the odd suggestion, tucked in a paragraph about Cohoric methods. The word that had seized him the first time had not let him go since. He traced it with his eyes, not with his finger, because the librarian scowled at such familiarity. The steels were sung, Barth wrote, and their temper carried memory of the true tongue. A scribe centuries later had written in the margin, Barth's fancy, in a neat italic that had an expensive smugness to it. Sam had copied the words onto a piece of paper and folded it twice and put it under his pillow. It was a dangerous sentence. Ambrose would say it was a stupid one. Steel could not be sung. Men sang. Steel rang when struck. The world had rules. Sam liked rules. Rules made maps. Maps made the unknown tolerable. At the wall, he had learned that rules did not always hold, and yet men lived by them and were not punished for the living. Sometimes the rule waiting to punish you was different than the one you had thought. He read on. Barth wrote of how the freehold's forges had been as numerous as its dragon lords, of how the iron from certain streams would take to temper with a sweet eagerness, while others fought like mules. He wrote of charcoal made from particular woods, of oils pressed from seeds that grew only in places where hot springs smoked in winter, of a notion that the heat of dragonfire was not mere heat, but carried a quality of attention, of alignment, that ordinary flame did not possess. The bond of the blade, he said, is not only fire to iron but meaning to shape. Sam turned the page, careful of the delicate corner. He thought of the dragon-glass dagger he had carried in terror and in hope, of how it had seemed to whisper in his hand when the other was near. He thought of the glass candle's light. The dangerous sentence unfolded in his mind like a paper with a second fold. The steels were sung. He could not sing, not well, but he could listen. That was what he had always done best. If steel had a song, perhaps it was not something a man sang to the metal, but something the metal sang as it remembered its making. He copied a paragraph and then another, his hand cramping. When he had ink enough on the page, he sanded it, blew gently, and closed the fold. The hours crept. Men came and went. Alaris paused beside his table, the long bow slung over one shoulder, as if he might have just come from a hunt rather than from a lecture. That was Alaris's trick, to look as if he lived freely on a hill above men's rules, even while moving within them. "You will look like someone who's found a gold coin in a midden," Alaris said, low. "I was only thinking. Thinking grinds the teeth." Alaris rapped a knuckle against the book. "Old Barth will sour your belly. Come to the yard. The air's crisp. Damden." "I have a lecture," said Sam, though in truth he would rather have flushed his lungs of the library's dust and the echo of that dangerous word. "Ambrose will forgive you if you say you were with me." "Ambrose forgives nothing," said Sam, but he half smiled. Alaris moved on toward a cluster of novices who had gathered to argue about whether a maze of brick cools a city more than a street of trees. Sam bent again to his copying to avoid being pulled into the argument. He had learned not to step into such talk unless he had stones in his pocket. Men liked to push when they saw you were soft. The bell marked the second hour after dawn, and the lecture was on the subject of plague. Ambrose was precise. He made a field from his words and then fenced it, and then put a hedge around the fence. He said plague was not a matter of divine temper, but of living influences that moved between breath and blood. He knew the behavior of rats and the patterns of ships. He knew how men lied when they were afraid, and how a city made a disease fat by its own habits. Sam admired that knowledge. He He wished the world would let itself be known like that everywhere. But the world was like water in a hand sometimes. It leaked where it was not expected to, and stayed where no one could scoop it. After the lecture, Ebros called him, a small crook of a finger that had more authority than a shout. "Samuel," he said when Sam drew near. "You were seen near the candle last night." Sam's ears heated. He had not touched the chain across the arch. He had sat in the dark and watched the cold light, and then gone away. "I did not." "Come." Ebros turned and set off at a pace that made Sam's lantern rattle against his thigh. Ebros's chain was a coat of winter. Thick, mutely impressive, the links of many metals making his throat look thinner by contrast. In the corridor, the air cooled as if they were descending rather than moving level. And then they were in the candle room, and the greenish light was ablade. "Yes," Ebros said to it, as if the light had asked a question. "Marwyn leaves messes." He turned to Sam, his features composed around a reservation that used to be kindness when he was younger. "It is not for you." Sam found that he could not lower his eyes. They stung, as if the light were an onion. "I only looked. It helps me think of the north. Of what I've seen. What you saw were phantoms upon snow made bold by night." Ebros did not look at the candle. He looked at Sam. "They are not my province, nor yours. We collect the mine's tools here. We do not chase its whims." Sam felt the little rebellion that sometimes rose in him like a bubble from the mud. Expensive and brief, the kind of feeling that didn't survive to be usefully spent. What if it is not whim? Then it is worse. Ebros rubbed his forehead with the side of his thumb and sighed as if the sigh had to pass through many layers of wool and iron to free itself. "You are diligent, Samuel. You read the dullest things with a hunger that would serve other men only for wine. But do not let Marwyn's ghost hollow you and fill you with its own noise. There is a world to be cleaned and fed. We will not feed it with speculation." "I know," said Sam, who did not know anything with ease. It was not that he wanted to slip chains or to call down dragons. He wanted to build a bridge that men could walk across without looking down. He wanted to give John something other than names that would not matter when the dark came in earnest. Ebros moved to the chain and lifted it, then let it fall so that it clinked with a tidy sound. "Keep to your readings. Learn the city. The river floods when it will. You cannot stop it by standing upon its bank and naming it." He left Sam there with the light and the memory of his own smallness. Sam stood a moment longer, because he could not help defying for the sake of defiance, and then bowed his head and went out. In the corridor, the air felt warmer, and the sounds of the day, the scrape of a broom, the clack of a bolt, came to him with their familiar ordinariness. He returned to the library. When he sat, the wood sighed, and the room's comforting boredom settled on him like a blanket. He did not last an hour. The thought that had been folding and unfolding in him began again, as patient as hunger. The steels were sung. The dragon glass had sung. He had felt it. The candle sang in its cold way too. The songs were not songs. They were arrangements of attention. When the bell in the high tower tolled, men felt it in their ribs and in their teeth. He had felt the others cry in his bones. Some sounds did not sit on the ear. They sat on the world. He set his quill aside and pushed back the stool. The movement made too much noise. One of the librarians looked up sharply, and then softened when he saw it was Sam, because Sam was not the kind of novice men expected trouble from. He left the book open upon the table so it would look as if he had only gone for a piss. The forge yards were in the citadel's belly behind a low wall that was warm even when the air had bite. The old men liked to complain that the yard encouraged brawling, but the only fight Sam had ever seen there was a fight against stubbornness. The iron was stubborn, and the tools and often the men. A pair of apprentices were beating copper flat, talking about a woman in a tavern who could lift a man with one hand. Sam moved past them toward a smaller corner where the bellmaker kept his broken forms and odd alloys. Hake, the bellmaker, was missing 2 fingers, and all of the patience that might have been stored in them. He had a scar along one cheek in the shape of a smear and eyes that were always grieving, something lost in the metal. "Maester," he said when he saw Sam. The word was a courtesy. Hake had no interest in the hierarchy of chains. If you're come to preach, the bells will ring for me without you. I'm come to listen, Sam said, flushing at his own boldness. He had never said such a thing before, and had only thought it in jest. It sounded worse aloud, and he almost apologized, but Hake lifted a shoulder in a shrug heavy with the dust of many years. Then listen. He flicked a hand toward the array of bells arranged along a bench. They were not pretty. They did not gleam. They looked like mouths with bad teeth, but when Hake struck one gently with a padded clapper, the sound that came was soft and pure, like wool being pulled. Sam felt it in his chest more than in his ears. He closed his eyes despite himself, seeing the glass candle's light swim green behind his lids, and then he opened them again, embarrassed. May I? Hake nodded without looking away from his work. Sam took up the clapper and touched it to another bell, smaller, with a hairline crack. The note it gave was thinner, but under it was a flavor of something colder? No. Dites. Finer. Dot. Like the difference between stepping into river water and stepping into seawater. He set the clapper down. Do you ever try to make them sing the same? Hake grunted. Same is for clocks and for men who want to sleep in winter. Bells are like throats. You can shape a throat, but you cannot make it sing your song if it does not want to. What is this? Sam told him, stumbling. About the Barth. About the sentence he could not let go. He spoke around the words that would make him sound like a fool, and tried to stay close to the stones he could put in his pocket. This bell's note. That bell's thinner echo, the way his bones had seemed to take a message before his ears did. Hake listened better than most men with more learning than him did. He did not laugh. He did not nod either. He only scraped his file across a bronze lip and watched the dust fall. A sword is not a bell, he said when Sam stopped. But it's not a loaf of bread either. Steel has temper. Temper is a kind of memory. You could say it holds on to what you do to it. That's what I think, Sam said, the words escaping as breath escapes a tight chest. I do not care what you think, Hake said mildly. I care what you can prove with the hammer. But I'll tell you this. When I temper a bell in the river, I can taste the iron in the water for an hour afterward. When I temper one in salt, I taste the salt for a day. Iron takes what is around it if you do it right. It holds what is absent if you do it wrong. Bear one. I need. Sam hesitated. I need something that can hold what is not around any longer. The song of a dragon, said Hake, as if naming something so ridiculous would remove it from the room. He shook his head and set down his file. If you ask the sea for dragonfire, it will give you salt and drown you to make its point. Perhaps there are other ways. Sam felt the bubble rise again and did not pop it this time. Other fires. The candle, said Hake. He had not seen it, but nothing that left such a burr of rumor in the air went unseen. If you want my help with a heresy, you will need better coin than that. I have knowledge, Sam said, wincing even as he said it. Men made jokes about maesters offering knowledge as coin to men whose hunger had the shape of bread. Not knowledge. A trick, perhaps. And the Citadel owes you 3 billets of fine copper. I could speak with Kedry. You could, Hake said, and he would wring you like a cloth for making him look ungenerous. He rubbed his scar with his thumb, and then spat to the side, not near the metal. Come tonight. When the apprentices have gone, bring your candle trick if you can steal it. I don't. It isn't? Sam swallowed, not daring to promise what he could not give. I have other glass, he said, thinking of the lenses that the Myrish called tears, of polished obsidian that made light go strange. And words. Words, echoed Hake in a tone that could have been contempt but was not. You will bring words to a forge. That is a thing I have not seen. I will bring the river. He jerked his chin toward the yard bailiff's bucket. And salt. Sam did not let himself thank him too much. Thanks made men nervous when what they had promised was not quite sensible. He bowed and went away with his chest full. Back in the library, he sat and stared at the Barth and could not read. The words on the page seemed to point not to themselves, but to a door that was not there yet. He made himself copy 2 pages on the matter of drains in plague time. The copying soothed him. The act of making a line neat steadied a mind that wanted to lope. When the sun moved past the center of its day and sent bars of light between the stacks, he took a short piece of iron from the smithy's rejects. The kind of thing a man made a nail from when he wanted a nail, but not a good one. It was rough, but it would tell him something. He wrapped it in cloth and tucked it under his shirt to warm it with his body, as if the iron might be more willing to be altered if it knew itself near flesh. Gilly was asleep when he slipped back into their cell. He stood long enough to listen to her breathe and to the child's small rumble, and then he dug under the mattress for the bundle he kept there. He had not told her about it fully. He meant to, but he did not yet know how to say the thing he meant to do without sounding like a boy bragging at supper that he would be a knight when he had never mounted a pony. He unwrapped the bundle on the bed. The dagger lay upon the coarse linen, black as a pool on a moonless night. The dragon glass in the light had a sheen like oil beneath water, colors that moved without moving. He had cleaned it after Castle Black and wrapped it and carried it across land and sea like a grime on the conscience. He took the Mirish lens as well, the one he had begged from a lens grinder by offering to catalog his stones and store them so that the man would not keep losing them to his own carelessness. He took too a small black stone that had come with the Mirish glass, the man not knowing what it was. Sam had read a description once in a sailor's journal, an obsidian eye from a lava field in the smoking sea. He did not know if the man had lied. Men lied about stones. Stones did not bother to lie about men. When he was done wrapping all as well as he could so they would not clink, he slipped out again. The hall was quiet. The air had that weight which told the body the day was old even before the bells said it. He went down and down again to the yard where Hake waited. They did not light more than one brazier. The apprentices had left the place like a table after supper. The wind came down the corridor and pushed a smell of river into the room. A dark smell, alive and sullen. Hake said nothing. He set the billet of iron across 2 bricks and made a small fire under it. Nothing a smith would think worth the name, but enough to redden the iron if fed and coaxed. "Your words," Hake grunted. Sam took out the lens and the obsidian eye and the dagger. He placed the dagger on the bench carefully, as one might lay a limb, and he set the lens in a little frame he had made of bent wire. He wished for the candle and did not let himself think of it more than a breath. He would not steal what he could not return. "The glass candle's light is cold," he said. "Not in the way of winter. In the way of a mirror that shows you your face before you smile. I cannot bring it, but I can see how light passes through this." He lifted the lens, and the brazier's flame bent into a teardrop on the wall. He moved the obsidian stone, and the teardrop lengthened and went pale. "Do you feel that?" he asked. Because he did. A shift in the room like the pause before a wave lifted your feet. Hake narrowed his eyes. He looked as a man looks who despises being told what to feel, and then feels it despite himself. "I feel the draft from the corridor. Perhaps that is all," Sam said, letting the disappointment pass through him like water. He held the lens steady, turned the iron gently with a pair of tongs and spoke quietly. Not spells. He did not know spells, and the men who claimed them could never show him the underpinnings. He spoke High Valyrian as best he could, the plain words of measurement and heat he had learned from books. He spoke the names of metals in the old tongue, because he liked the way those words sat heavy in the mouth, like stones one meant to throw. He spoke the names of rivers he had read about, and the names of forests where charcoal burned hot and clean. He spoke of the wall because it was a thing that had been asked to be itself for a very long time, and had for the most part done so. He did not sing. He spoke the way a man speaks to a horse he wishes not to startle. The iron moved through its colors slowly. Hake arranged the bellows so that the fire's breath was gentle and steady. When the iron was the color Barth had called cherry, Sam asked Hake to hold the lens so the heat did not fall off. He took up the dagger, the dragon glass cool in his hand, and held it a hand's breadth from the iron as it heated. The room's smell changed, oil and hot metal, and a faint tang like the inside of a struck flint. He found himself holding his breath, and then released it to find a rhythm. Beside him, Hake's lumped hand held the lens without shaking. When the iron was nearly orange, Hake grunted. "Enough petting," he said, and lifted the tongs. He moved the iron to the bucket, which sat half full of the honeywine's brown, salted water. He plunged the iron straight down. Steam rose, smelling of silt and something burnt that was not wood. They listened to the water's angry talk. It subsided. Hake drew the iron out and laid it upon the bricks. He and Sam looked at it as if it might say what had happened. It was iron, dark and wet, not changed to the eye beyond any iron that had been heated and cooled. Hake grunted again. "You gave it words. It might give you one back when it's sober." Sam exhaled, laughing, then put his hand to his mouth at the impertinence of his own body. Hake's half-smile was a thing a man could miss if he was not careful. "Strike it," Hake said. Sam took a small hammer and struck. The note was duller than he had hoped, brighter than he had feared. It made the obsidian eye on the bench ring very faintly, as if in sympathy, and the lens quivered in its frame. Hake's eyebrow lifted. "Again," he said. Sam struck again. The note seemed, to Sam, to come closer to his chest and less to his ear. He breathed, slow. He lifted the dragon glass, and without letting the edge touch the iron, he drew it near and held it there. The iron's sound did not change, but something under it shifted like a sleeper turning. He set the hammer down very carefully and wiped his palm on his rope. Hake took the iron in his tongs and swore when he touched the dragon glass's edge by mistake. "It bites like ice," he said. And then he set the iron back upon the bricks, turned it, fed the fire, and began again. Sam spoke. He changed the words. He let High Valyrian go and spoke the common tongue. He told the iron to remember what it had been made for: edge and resistance, long use without sulking. He told it that men were coming who would not break under heat or cold, who would move silently like fish and strike like frost upon a reed. He told it not to be afraid of breaking. He told it to be too proud to break. He realized he was sweating more than the little fire would demand. He realized Hake was listening as if the words mattered to him as well. They quenched again, in salt, not river, and the steam rose with a different shape. The room seemed to shrink around them. On the bench, the obsidian eye rolled a fraction, as if it had been touched. Hake's mouth did not move, but his eyes were lit with something that might have been faith in a man who despised faith. "Now," he said. Sam struck the iron with the hammer once more, and the note was not different, except that in it, there was a ghost of some other field, some larger place where this note would have been a harmony rather than a solitary thing. He felt it like a hunger and like a prayer. He placed his palm against the iron. It was still warm, and beneath the warmth, something else, an attention that was not his own but was not alien either. "It is only iron," Hake said, proving to himself and to Sam that he had not been moved beyond reason. "But it is iron that wants to be a blade and not a nail." Sam breathed once, then twice. He wanted to laugh, and to weep, and to run, and to sleep. He did none of these. He swallowed. "May I take it?" "Take it," Hake said. "And do not show it to a man who will talk about it in the tavern before he has held it in his hand." Sam nodded so hard his chain clinked. He wrapped the iron in cloth, and the lens and stone in another cloth, and tied both with string, then thanked Hake with a steadiness he had to invent. He left the yard and walked too quickly, making himself slow each few paces, afraid that his feet would outrun his thought, and he would stumble and fall and lose all of it to the stones. He reached the corridor that led past the candle room, and stopped. It was wrong to go in. It was folly to be near it twice in a day. He slipped the string loose on the lens and the stone and rocked them in his palm, and then did go in, because he was Sam, and not brave until bravery made sense in retrospect. The candle's pale green light filled the narrow room like a thin liquid poured to the lip of a cup. In it, Sam felt again that pressure along the bones of his skull and down into his shoulders. He held the lens and the stone in his hands, one in each, and lifted them so the candle's light passed through them and made shapes on the wall. He did not speak. He thought of John. He thought of Gilly. He thought of the night the ravens had flown mad at the sight of white forms moving between the trees. He thought of how small a thing a dagger is, and of how quickly a man can run out of daggers in the face of a winter that does not care. When he walked back to the cell, the iron rapped against his stomach. He found Gilly sitting up, her hair wild with sleep. "You crept," she said, half in accusation, half in affection. "I walked," he said, sitting upon the bed with a sound he could not help. "I needed to hear a thing." He pressed the iron to his belly. It was not burning, just warm, but the warm helped him feel it was still here, not a thought he would wake from. "You hear things men do not," she said. She left off there, perhaps to spare him what came next, that he heard cruel things whispered from memory by men who were not in the room. She touched his sleeve. "Will it help?" "I do not know." He told her about Hake and the lens and the salt. He told her as if explaining a meal. How much of this? How much of that? And in the telling, the thing felt less like a daring and more like a recipe they might make again if they could get the ingredients. Her eyes grew intent, as they had when he had taught her to read the letters that spelled her name. "If you can make steel that knows a thing." She said slowly. "Can you teach a dozen men to make it? If I can show the notes to hit and which oil to use and how long to hold the color," he said, thinking himself into a position he had not had courage to hold in his mind, until she asked, "Then perhaps, if it isn't only me and this night." She nodded, not smiling but full of something like the beginning of a smile. "You tell me what to watch for when you go to the yard." She said, "If a man comes who isn't supposed to, I'll cough." And she demonstrated the cough, which was not like a cough at all. It sounded like a low bird in a hedge. He laughed too loud, then pressed his hand to his mouth again. They slept little. In the morning, Sam woke to the child's small sounds and the bell's austere count. He went to his tasks with the iron tucked under a folded shirt in the chest, feeling as if he were walking with a treasure that would be compromised by breath. He spent too long that day on his duties. He went to the rookery and to the copying room and to Ambrose's lecture on wet nurses. He chose those tasks the way a man chooses to clean a room, when he is afraid of writing a letter. But the iron waited, and his mind, which could be drawn aside by any talk of the mundane, found the words on the page going thin. At twilight, he took the wrapped iron to the quill and tankard, because the tavern's light and air might tell him something the library could not. The quill sat upon its little island, like a hen on eggs, comfortable in all weather, the river snug around it. Sam disliked the noise but loved the water smell. He took a corner table and unwrapped the iron under his cloak, as if revealing a loaf he meant to eat alone and slow. He was not going to wave it around. He wanted to hold it in a place where men were talking, to see if the iron made the talk lean toward it as men lean toward heat. The tavern swayed with bodies and voices. A pair of Tyrell men were arguing about whether the Hightower should have brought its fleet north to fight Euron sooner. A peddler from the Stormlands told a story about a goat with too many legs. A maester with small round spectacles seemed to be attempting to court the tavern keeper's daughter by explaining the gnome kinds of frogs. Sam held the iron in both hands, his palms sweating, and he listened. At first he thought himself a fool. The iron was iron. The noise was noise. Then voices near him seemed to go a fraction softer for a breath, then resume, then soften again when his thumbs rubbed along the iron's length. He held his breath because he could not help it. Alaris slid into the bench across from him. His presence, like a needle popping a bubble before the bubble, admitted it was there. "You look like a man about to bleed," Alaris said under the noise, his lips unmoving. Sam closed his hands around the iron. "I was trying to listen." "Listening is safer when you have a drink to hide behind," Alaras said, and signaled. "What am I listening to?" Sam did not tell him, because it would be silly to say he was listening to a piece of iron that had been held near a piece of black glass. He said, "The river." "It's always the river," said Alaris. "What did Ambrose say to you?" Sam lifted one shoulder as if it was heavy. "That I should mind drains and breath and hands washed with vinegar and not the cold light in the candle room." "He is not wrong, but he is not the only one who can be right." Alaris's mouth tilted. He had a face that looked as if it had been carved a bit too lightly. His smiles and frowns almost passed through it like shadows across water. "No," he said. And then the ale arrived, and Sam drank half of his too quickly and had to cough, and Alaris thumped his own chest in sympathy. "If you plan to save the world," he said when Sam could breathe, "it's good to have 2 or 3 methods in mind." "I'm not," Sam began, and then stopped, because lying to Alaris was like trying to blow out the river. He lowered his voice further. "If steel could be made to hold attention, not by dragon nor by cohort alone, then men could carry something in their hands that would not fail when the light grows thin. That's all. It is only steel." "Bam? Only steel," Alaris said, as one might say, "only bread or only air." He reached across and touched Sam's wrist, where the iron's shape made a small tent of his sleeve. His fingers rested a moment, and then withdrew. "Be careful of your faith, and of other men's faith. If you convince them it can be done, they will want to own it. If you fail, they will want to leave you somewhere you cannot be heard for a while." Sam swallowed. "Why are you helping me?" "I'm not helping you." Alaris looked past him, then back, his expression clear and unreadable at once. "I am watching a man who might do a thing worth seeing, and I like the trouble you get into. It is a different shape than most trouble here. This place likes trouble with menus." He slid out of the bench as easily as he had arrived. "There is a man from Meyer who might know something you need," he said without turning. "He mends lenses near the sailmaker's gate and drinks too much and loses stones he should not. Ask him what he makes of light that has no heat. Tell him you heard of it in a sailor's lie." And now the Mirish lens grinder had a shop that was mostly shelf and a door that mostly admitted the smell of pitch and wind from the docks. He wore a cap with the peak pulled low, so that when he looked up, his eyes seemed to come from under a hill. He greeted Sam with the quick courtesy of a man who sees a novice chain and tastes profit. When Sam made it clear he had little coin and less value to trade, the man's courtesy did not leave. It soured to a joke he would tell later. But he did answer Sam's questions. He said that light that did not warm existed in Asabhad and in boys' stories. And if a man had seen it, he had chosen to leave his tongue on the floor, so he could not name it and thus keep it from being stolen. But then, the man added with a turn of the cap, there were stones that bent light so that it ran rather than rested. Make a light run fast enough, he said, and it has no time to look at what it passes. It does not warm because it does not stay. He pulled a drawer and spilled out a selection of little lenses upon a cloth like so many clear beetles. Sam bought one with 2 bent coppers, and the man laughed at the insult to his trade and sent him away. The days gathered around his thoughts slowly, like boulders around a sapling. He could not move them without showing that he meant to push. He did not push. He watched. He returned to Hake's yard. They made another piece of iron, and then a third. They bound the tongs with rawhide because the dragon glass bit Hake's fingers when it came near. Sam changed the words he spoke. He stopped trying to tell the iron what it ought to be, and began to tell it what would be asked of it. When he spoke of cold, the iron seemed to drink it, opening itself in the most modest way to that idea. When he spoke of meaning, could he speak of meaning to a metal? The metal answered by ringing in a way he could feel just behind his breastbone, as if in a space that had always been there waiting. He yielded to temptation and took a shaving of a Valyrian steel link. He did it with such shame that he could scarcely think while he cut it. He took less than the head of a match, and even so the link looked at him afterward, as if it knew. He placed the shaving on the anvil and held the obsidian near it, and watched for the twitch of a light he had learned to name for himself. He saw nothing. He felt instead a refusal. The shaving had all the attention it needed. It would not take his. He slept badly. He woke sweating from dreams where the candle's light climbed his chain like a vine, violets growing in winter, voices covering him like sand. Gilly lay awake beside him and did not ask. They touched their hands together like children trying to be brave. He told Alaras only some of it. He avoided Ibros. He went to the rookery and spoke soft to the ravens, and the ravens turned their heads and made that little clatter the beak makes when it has a thought. He read Barth again and again. And when the words did not yield, he read something dull until his mind calmed, and then read Barth again. He sat in a candle room for as long as he dared with his hands under his thighs. so that he could not be tempted to reach. He thought, if there is a song, it does not have to be beautiful. It has to be true. By chance, the first use came not in a test, but in an accident. In the copyist room, a boy named Ferret, gods knew what his mother had named him, cut his hand badly on a blade used to trim across a crooked page. The cut was long and ran along the thumb so that the boy could not grip without tearing it wider. Ambrose was sent for and was cutting strips of linen and asking sensible questions about the boy's last meal when Sam reached into his sleeve for the knife he carried for cutting wax. His hand closed instead around the little piece of iron he'd kept there to feel its warmth and to remind himself that he was not imagining what nights in the forge had suggested. He pressed the iron against the boy's palm to keep him from closing his hand. The boy hissed and stilled. His eyes flew to Sam's face with the startled look a man has when he meets himself unexpectedly in a window. "See, cold," he whispered. "But good." Ambrose glanced up. His glance did not linger. "Hold him," he said. "Do not let him squirm." Sam hadn't been letting the boy squirm. The boy had stopped wanting to. Ambrose cleaned and bound and wrapped and then told the boy how to sleep, and when to come back, and how to keep the wound from turning. He took the iron from Sam's hand without looking at it and used it to support the boy's fingers while he wrapped. Later, when the boy had gone and the room had returned to the noise of scratching pens and careful throats, Ambrose put the iron down and rubbed his fingers together as if to warm them. "You have been in the forge too much," he said without accusation. "I will go less," Sam lied. "Go more if you are learning. Go less if you are hiding." He looked at Sam in that way he had of being kind and of disappointing him in the same instant. "And do not let your desire to find poetry make you deaf to prosody. There is a rhythm to the true. You do not need a candle to hear it." But Sam did not know how to explain that sometimes the rhythm only came when the candle's light had shaved off the day's thin distractions. He carried the iron back to Hake. "It is not a blade," he said, "but it will teach us something while we make the blade." "It will teach you," Hake said darkly, "that men have hands and that hands like to be useful. I despair at some of the things you try to teach me." But he did not refuse Sam the fire. They began again. It was a smith from Ibn who said the thing that let the door turn. The man came in to trade iron blooms for copper wire, and he watched Sam speak to the metal and Hake's careful way with quenching, and he grunted and spat and said, "You speak like priests when you want to be fishermen." His beard smelled faintly of whale fat, and his eyes were ice chips that had caught the sun and decided to keep it. "If you want the metal to mind, make it listen. Make it hear something it cannot ignore." "How would I do that?" Sam asked, too eager, and the man laughed with half his mouth and shook his head, already leaving. "We had drums in winter," he said over his shoulder. "The ice spoke back when we woke it with the right drum. It did not matter if we believed it was speaking. The fishing went better. Your metal is a kind of ice. Hot or cold. Beat it the way you beat a stubborn door, but not with your hammer. With the thing that the hammer makes." After he had gone, the sentence took a full day to settle into Sam. When it did, he went to the bell bench and took the small cracked bell that Hake had set aside, because it was useful for nothing but instructing boys in how not to strike. It had an ugliness that Sam found bracing. He placed it near the iron and struck it lightly while the iron heated. The sound was disagreeable. It did not move the air delicately the way the pure notes did. It had a burr like a man whose temper was bad even before he'd had his wine. Sam kept striking it. He changed the tempo. He changed the pressure. He aligned the strokes with his breath. The iron glowed, and its glow looked unlike the other glows only in that Sam wanted it to be unlike. Still, he kept on with the cracked bell until Hake told him if he did not stop, he'd give the bell to the river for its own sake. They tried with another bell, and then a long narrow bar he could strike, because it sang thinner and higher, and then a thick disc that made a sound like a cloud being asked to carry stones. Sam touched the obsidian to these sounds the way he had touched it to the iron. He felt nothing dramatic. He felt the way a man feels standing in the dark before his eyes adjust, and the room tells him where the table is. It was not proof. It was something that would let him try again. The first blade they made was a little knife, because knives do not break a heart when they crack. They are not long enough to speak of promises unmet. It was ugly. Hake said so bluntly, and Sam nodded, and it cut Hake's palm as if Hake had asked for it. They had to bind his hand, and Hake swore and grinned simultaneously, impressed despite himself. The second knife was less ugly. It hummed in his hand like a hive far away. He could not make himself put it down for a long moment after it cooled, though it warmed his fingers the way stones do when they have sat in sun. Hake told him to stop looking as if he had been kissed. Sam took that knife and went to the rookery with it, because the ravens had their own ideas about song. He held the knife near them and watched for a change. The birds cast their heads this way and that. The little black one with white around its eyes pecked at the air near the knife's edge as if there were gnats no human eye could see. The gray raven that liked him least made a sound he had never heard from it. Something between a trill and a scold. He withdrew the knife slowly, and the birds settled. He brought it back, and they fussed. It was not experiment enough to prove anything. It was enough to set a hook. He sent a letter to John. He did not say what he was doing. He did not call it a method or a making. He said, "I am learning to listen to metal." He said, "If I can send you something, I will." He said, "Please do not die." Joan's raven took the letter in rain that had seemed as if it would not end until the city itself had softened and slumped. The bird looked at him as if it knew it carried something heavy. Sam watched it go until the fog swallowed it. After that, he made time a thing he could set on a bench and weigh. He went to Ebros's lectures. He made himself useful to Kedri so Kedri would grumble, but leave him be. He let Olaris draw him into an archery lesson, so he would have an answer if someone said he was never seen in the yard. He spent hours in Hake's little corner and gave himself headaches with the bell tones. He put the obsidian away when he could not help wanting to touch its black face to his lip like a sweet. He ate enough because Gilly watched him and would not let him forget. She came to the yard one night and stood with her arms folded, the child asleep against her breast, while Sam and Hake worked. Sam spoke. Not songs but lists in a soft voice, and Hake made the fire behave, and Gilly hummed under her breath without knowing she did. The hum found a place in the room, like a third hand. Sam turned toward it and saw that her face was soft in a way he had not seen since the ship. She saw him and smiled and stopped humming, embarrassed. The knife on the brick seemed to dim, as if it had been pleased, and was now only polite. "Do that again," Hake said, surprising both of them. She flushed. "It's only a tune for quieting a child." "Quiet the metal," Hake said, then grimaced, as if hating the phrase. "Or make it less proud of its noise." She hummed again, hesitantly. The note was not a note anyone would name. It had no right to be lovely. It was a thing a mother makes, in a place where the voice cannot be a flag. The sound lined up with the cracked bell's ragged tone in some kind of refusal that made the refusal more orderly. Sam spoke the old tongue without thinking. The knife cooled with an air of a thing that had made a decision, and liked what it had chosen. He did not sleep that night. He lay with his eyes open, and watched the ceiling make its slow arguments with shadow. In the morning, he carried the knife to the crypt beneath the sept, where the stones were cold, even in summer. He pressed the blade against the stone. The knife stung his hand with that particular sting iron gives when it is telling you its limits. He pressed harder and said, "There will be colder. Be ready." He felt foolish, and felt also a sternness he recognized from his father, but untempered by contempt. He pressed harder still, and the edge bit into the stone a hairbreadth. A quarter hairbreadth more than it ought. He withdrew, shaking, and a small clatter told him the chip he'd made had fallen to the floor and skittered like a bug. He wanted to run to Ebros and place the knife on the desk and say, "Look." He wanted to run to Hake and say, "We can do it." He wanted to run to the dock and wait for the ship that would carry him north and place the knife in Joan's hand and say, "Hold it near the cold and tell me if it listens." He did none of these. He wrapped the knife and placed it under his shirt and went to the rookery and cut meat and told the gray raven it was too greedy. He cleaned a quill. He beat dust from a mat. He went to the quill and tankard and did not buy beer because he had not the coin. He sat and watched other men's mouths move and hands gesture and thought, the things that will kill us are not in the room, and we are laughing. The adjustment came when a letter arrived bearing a broken seal. Joan's hand was heavy and neat, the letters like men standing in a line in too cold a wind. He said the wildlings came mostly as expected. He said they were too many to feed, but fewer than would kill them all. He said there were new tales in the north. He said the others had taken a camp, and when the men came back for the bodies in daylight, the bodies had blood frozen in them, like wine in winter. He did not ask for a miracle. He said simply, "Send what you can." Sam took the letter to the forge. He put it on the bench near the obsidian and the cracked bell and Hake's bad-tempered tools. He said then, in his soft voice, "Let us try to make something that goes beyond my hands being gentle. Let us make a rule out of this." He did not say mass. He did not say hundreds. He said a rule, because rules could be taught. The next days were faithful. They tried iron from the riverbanks and iron from a merchant who would have cheated if he had recognized Hake's patience as a weakness instead of a reserve. They tried charcoal from ash, and from elm, and from an unknown wood that burned with a scent like spiders crushed under a book. They tried quenching in river, and in salt, and in vinegar that made Hake swear as his eyes watered. They tried the candle's light only indirectly. The obsidian eye and the myrish lens and Sam's hand, placed just so to catch the breeze from the candle room. When some novice foolishly left the outer arch open, they tried Gilly's hum and Hake's cursing and silence. The knives began to arrive not as strangers but as cousins, each with a family resemblance, each with a small difference in temper that Sam could feel when he held them. He cut meat in the rookery with one and did not dull it. He sliced vellum with another and watched the edge remain a ridge of light. He pressed a third against stone and saw it resist, as if the stone were wax, the tiniest of bites taken without hurry. He brought a fourth to the crypt and held it against the cold, near the tomb of a Hightower lad, who had died young, and whose carved eyes were too large. He felt the blade wake, as a man wakes when a draft crosses his neck. He did not know if he imagined this. He wrote it down anyway in a small book he kept under his shirt. In it he wrote, "Ash charcoal best of those tried. Saltwater quench with whale oil gives a tone closest to third. Cracked bell at 375 strikes, while at chase 75 strikes, while at cherry color. Obsidian eye to stand near to lend a room its hush. Words, not commands but promises." He made mistakes. He blundered. He cracked a blade that had cost him something of his hope and something of Hake's sleep. He quarreled with Gilly without knowing why, because he was too tired, and she was drier and more brittle than he had learned she could be, and because the child would not sleep the way children in books always slept when a story needed them quiet. He apologized badly, and then well. He bled and burned and learned to wear the little burns like beads. Nothing to be proud of, nothing to be ashamed of, something to count. He did not take the glass candle. He did not ask one of the archmaesters to stand by. He wanted witnesses, and he did not, because a thing being watched can be made different by the watching. It was not until he put one of the knives against ice that he let himself believe. There was a merchant from Eastwatch who had brought down blocks of river ice packed in straw because he wanted to show Old Town a trick it ought to already know. Cool rooms for ale in the heat. He brought it to the taverns and to the kitchens, and to men who had money to keep fish sweet longer. He brought a piece to the quill and tankard, and asked the maesters if they wished to marvel. Men marveled stupidly all the time. It was their favorite entertainment. Sam went with Alaris in tow, and stood in the back, and watched the man unwrap the straw to reveal a block that steamed like a ghost's breath. The room crowded, and laughed, and touched the block, and yelped, and laughed more. When the merciful press of men moved aside, Sam leaned and held his knife against the ice. He did not cut. He held. He felt an answer come up the blade into his hand. It was not heat. It was attention. The knife had been listening to him, and to Hake, and to Gilly's humming, and to the bad bell. It had been made to listen. Now it heard the cold it had been promised, and liked it. The surface of the ice clouded under the blade, as if the knife made a breath of warm air around itself. Only, it was cold. So that could not be. Sam did not understand what physical thing he had made happen. He did not need to. The knife moved the way a fish moves when it likes the current. It bit because it wished to meet what it had been told must be met. It cut a small channel into the ice without the tremor he had come to expect from lesser steel. Alarissa's eyes were upon his when he looked up. His friend nodded once. "Send it," he said. "Send 3. Send 10. And do not let Ibros see them before you have already done it." He turned and shouldered a jovial man at the bar out of the way with grace. "You will need a patron," he added. Sam's throat tightened. "The Hightower? Too slow. Sober. Their caution is addressed. They will not take off even to bathe." Alarissa's eyes flickered to the window where the tower fired its night beacon. "But perhaps their steward has sons." He smiled with nothing in it. "Or you could ask a different house." "Which house?" Sam said, thinking not really of the Reach but of the North, which to Old Town was a rumor with wolves. "Your father's," Alaris said, and lifted his brows when Sam made a noise that was too bodily to be polite. "No, unhandsome joke. Forgive me. You will need someone stubborn enough to back a thing that must be done when the men who mind the gates of knowledge prefer to pretend winter is an idea. Who do you know who is stubborn? Who would not wait to be told where to stand? Now, Jan." Sam said without breathing. "Then write him again, and send the knife. You will make more. You will make better. If you send only your best, you will die before the world is ready." Hake did not like that Sam meant to give away a knife. He said nothing that Sam could use to argue with, and everything that would make Sam want to apologize. He turned the fire tame and let Sam heat one last blade. He held the lens. He held the bell in his palm so that Sam could strike without the bell's own fraction of movement throwing off the tone he sought. He let Gilly hum. He said only, when the blade had cooled and the work was done, "This is not a game." "I know," Sam said, and held the knife like a baby bird he meant not to crush. "And you are not a hero," Hake added, as if to keep safe the room from any upward rush of feeling that might release a foolishness. "But you will need to act as one for a day or two." Sam sent the knife with the gray raven because the gray raven had greed and also fidelity. He wrapped the blade in oiled leather, then in a strip of cloth torn from his own sleeve, as if that made it part of him in a way he might be brave about handing away. He wrote in his small book the particulars. He wrote their small song. He did not sign these pages. He did not hide them somewhere clever where men would discover them after he died and call him noble. He put them under his shirt. He gave the raven the strip of leather, and the boy took the bird on his finger and launched it toward the morning. The raven's wings cut at once into the layer of fog that hugged the river. It was like a knife entering a block of ice. It went. The world did what it did. Sam did what he could. He went to Ibros' lecture and took neat notes. He sat in the library and pretended the handwriting of a chainless scribe could interest him. He went to the forge and did not try to make something new. He practiced making something old and consistent and dull well. He felt very much like a man who has pushed a small boat into a current and is not certain whether it will turn back to bite him. Joan's reply came late, because the world had ways of making a man earn his belief. It came with another letter, this one with a hand Sam did not know. The first letter was only a few lines. John said, "I took it onto the ice that covers the lake near Eastwatch, when the night was the kind of cold that makes men angry." He said, "I set a dead hand there." And he said he did nothing other than that, because there was nothing else to do. He said the hand froze more quickly by an hour than any hand set down beside it. He said he had taken the knife to a better test after that, and that he would not write of it in ink. He said, "Another. As many as you can." The second letter was from a steward who did not know John well enough to call him brother. It said in neat trader's script that if any man in Old Town wished to send north a shipment of iron, the road would be made clear for it, and shelters warmed, and that coin would follow, and that men would remember. It bore a seal only a fool would put on a note of this sort if he wished to keep the wolves from lifting their heads. The seal was a stag inside a sunburst, and Sam looked at it and set it down and looked at it again, because sometimes the world would not let you pretend a thing would be small and manageable and yours alone. So he began to think about scale. He spoke to Hake about men who could be trusted to listen. Hake shook his head at that word. "You want?" Hake said, and stopped there as if he might better take the remainder back into himself and scald it. "You want a net of hands." He told Sam the names of 2 men who would take instruction without adding their own sauce to it. He told Sam the name of one man he hated, whose fingers had the exact shape a hammer loves. Sam wrote them down, feeling both foolish and like a man writing a recipe for a pie that might keep a town fed. He spoke to Gilly about leaving, and about not leaving, and about the possible shape of a home in a city that did not like her at all. She said, "Do not tell me not to be afraid. Tell me a plan, and I will be afraid while we do it." He told her about making knives that hummed true, and about making more of them, and then teaching another man to make them, and another. "What if they see you?" she asked. "They will," he said, because it was the day he could not afford to lie. "But I have links now. Men listen to links. And if they do not, I will tire them with my presence until they do." He took her hand, and felt again that he had never held anything worth more. He spoke to Alaris about men who might be killed if he did not weigh his steps properly. Alaris nodded, as if he had expected to hear this from him, and was satisfied to have been right. "You will be a river now," Alaris said. "You will find your own banks. Do not let them be too narrow. Do not flood the wrong field, though I think you will. Men do." He spoke not to Ebros but at him, placing a neat stack of notes upon his table about pest houses and their proper distance from wells. Ebros lifted the top page and set it down. "You are up to something," he said mildly. "I am trying to help John," Sam answered, because that was true and because Ebros would smell lies like smoke on a man's clothes. "There are too few blades and they are too slow." Ebros was silent long enough that Sam felt the silence as a draft. "If you meddle in the higher mysteries," Ebros said at last, "you will be bitten by the lower ones that have more teeth. Keep your feet on the floor, Samuel." "I will," Sam said, and thought that floors sometimes were warmer than a man could tolerate and cooler than a man could stand. He thought then of the Hightower's bell. He thought of the set of bells he would need if he were to teach Hake's repairman, and the angry man with the perfect hands, and the boy in the corner whose humming had proofed the room. He thought of a room filled with low sound that was not a song, but was the rails upon which a kind of making could move. He began to write the method in a way a man could follow without knowing the shape of the fear that had birthed it. He thought of men with poor light and old oil and bad tongues. He thought of what they would have, and what they would not. He wrote it with small words. He did not say, "Sing." He said, "Strike the bell, as it has been marked. Here and here, and here, while the iron is this color, and do not pretend a color is another color. Because you are eager," he said. "Hold a stone like this in this place, so that it does nothing but make the air different," and he wrote carefully. "If the room feels different, do not be afraid. If it feels very different, stop and breath into your hands." He wrote, "Use ash. Use salt. Do not overfeed the fire because you wish to hurry what cannot be hurried without sulking." He wrote, "Speak if you must, but say what will be asked of the blade, not what you hope the blade will be. Hope makes poor metal." He drew the cracked bell and the marks where it should be struck. He drew the lens and the stone, and how to set them. He drew the shape of the kiss of the iron into the brine. He drew Hake's hand and Gilly's hum in such a way that a man not privy to the drawing would take them for notes on when to cough. He did not call it anything at all. He did not name it for himself, or for the city, or for any man who might claim it as men claim rivers, and say, "This is mine." He put the papers in a leather wrap and held it to his chest for long enough to feel foolish. He made a second and a third copy with the patience of a man carding wool for someone's winter. He sent one set north with another gray raven, and one with a black bird that liked him, and bit only sometimes, and he told himself that he had moved beyond the point where failure would kill it quietly. He took the third set and wrapped it in cloth, and carried it on his own body. He kept it at all hours. He wished he could sew it under his skin. The city understood nothing of what it carried and yet shivered in small ways that told a man if he watched that something had shifted. The bell at the high tower seemed, once or twice, to stroke the air differently. The gulls flew lower. The goldsmiths complained of a kind of thin rust that would creep up from cheap copper when men spoke too loud in their shops. The taverns were louder. Men argued about whether the Lannisters had been a bad luck, that the Reach had half condemned themselves for marrying. Babies were born. Men died in the usual ways. A rumor went through the short lanes near the docks that a man had come with a knife that made the cold come out of the wood when he touched the knife to it. Men said he had come from the north. Men said he had come from Ashai. Men said he had come from a woman who had kept her tongue between two books until it learned to be wise. Sam watched the rumor breed with itself and make clever bastard children. He kept to his path. He arranged a room, not a forge yard now, but a cellar that had been used for keeping onions, and now kept a set of bells and a kind of order. He brought Hake, who grumbled and followed, and the angry-handed man who had a perfect grip, and the boy who hummed, and he began to teach as if he had had a life of teaching, and as if men were not watching to catch him in pride or folly. He spoke quietly. He set men to tasks. He let no one touch the obsidian stone too many times. He used the cracked bell more often than the pure one. He let Gilly sit with the child and be within sight and felt stronger for it. He had thought that making something like this would require him to be a kind of man he had not yet been. It required him only to be himself without apology for longer than he had thought possible. One evening, after the bells had been struck in their poor slow music, and the last blade of the day had been brought from the brine steaming and stubborn, there came a tap on the door that was not a knock, but a courtesy. The man who entered smelled faintly of clean linen and the river. He wore no chain. He did not have the air of the faith. He had the particular confidence of a man who keeps accounts for someone whose name is heavy. Samuel Tarley, he said, smiling. I am Arlen Lygood, in service to the Hightower. I hope I interrupt nothing vital. It has come to our notice that there is a project ongoing in a corner of our city that touches upon temper. And now, Sam felt his mouth go dry. Beside him, Hake did not shift his weight. Gilly reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a small, defiant flick. Arlen Lygood smiled again like a man placing a golden coin on a table and asking only whether the light caught it well. It seems to us that winter may be a practical matter after all. We would prefer to be its governors rather than its audience. He looked at the knife steaming upon the bricks as if looking at a loaf that might feed his children. We would like very much to assist your work, and to ensure that the faith and the archmaesters do not, in their different ways, misplace it. Assist, Hake muttered, not softly. Assist, Arlen repeated, undisturbed. There are rooms that do not leak. There are men who can carry things that should not be dropped. There are coffers that can be opened without a servant whispering of it. There is the small matter of coin. And, he added, there is this. He placed upon the bench an object wrapped in linen and unwrapped it so that the candlelight fell on something that drank it. It was a link, dark and cold. Archmaester Marwyn, said Arlen, which he neglected to take with him. He will not mind its use more than he minds the shape of a storm in a sea he has chosen to sail. Sam reached for the link without meaning to, and then stopped with his hand above it, exactly the way a man will stop with his hand above a child he is not sure is his to lift. He felt, in that breath, that something had come to find him, and that it would be worse to send it away than to let it sit at his table. He did not look at Hake. He did not look at Gilly because he would have seen his fear reflected back to him, and it would have grown brave with witnesses, and he needed for fear to be small a little while longer. You may, he said, and his voice was calm in a way he did not feel, if you can keep the rooms from leaking. Arlen Lygood's smile was not quite triumph. He was too polished for that. It was approval and investment, and the smallest shape of relief. I can keep whatever rooms you wish, he said, because he was a man who had been given a set of keys when his master had needed a set of locks to be closed. And, if you will forgive my second intrusion in a single night, there is a messenger from the north who wishes to speak with you by the river where we are always being reminded of the sea. Sam drew breath as if the room were thin. He looked at Hake and at Gilly, and neither of them told him to say no. He tucked the link into the cloth with a care that was not reverence, but was very near to it. and he let Arlen lead him up into the night. Old Town was a city that had reversed itself in darkness. The lights were below, near the water, and in the warm rooms. The high tower wore its light high, and its base slept. The smell of fish and human closeness drifted from alleys. The river glided with its immodesty of always going forward. The messenger waited with a hood that made him an outline, and a body that said he had forgotten how to stand still. When Sam came near, the man threw back his hood with the impatience of the north, and showed a face carved more by wind than by time. "Sam," he said, and for half a heartbeat, Sam made the mistake of thinking it would be John, and that the world had briefly turned generous. It was not. "I am Ed," the man said, almost smiling. "Toilet if you need to be formal." John would have come, but he is busy not dying. He sent me because I am lighter and can run if need be, and because I do not tell stories I do not believe. Sam laughed, then stopped himself. "Is he well?" he asked, because his body had replaced alive with well in foolish mercy. "He is not dead," Ed said, and the words were as kind as he knew how to make them. "He says that the knife made a noise the cold wanted to hear. He says that a man with blue eyes did not rise again when we let him hold the knife while we burned him. He says to ask you whether the knives can be longer. He says swords. He says if you can send a sword that likes the cold as well as the knife does, he will forgive you for being in the south." "Ben." Sam closed his eyes and saw again the cracked bell, and the lens, and the sloppy handwriting of his own notes, and the iron's slow glow. "Yes," he said, and then, to be honest, "if I can. If it is not luck alone. But yes." "Good," Edith said, very simply, with the pleasure of a man who is happy to carry good news once in a long while. "He says to tell you that he has men who will learn to make them. He says to tell you to be careful, because the men who make gold from air do not like to see other men learn to make bread. He says to tell you," and here Edie smiled fully, a dark crack in his face, "that he misses you, and that you should not forget to eat. He says you will forget." Sam swallowed against whatever his throat was doing and nodded, and then nodded again because he did not know what else to do with the simple weight of that. Tell him I am doing what I can. Tell him I did not bring the candle." Ed tilted his head. "The candle, the one that burns cold." Sam said, then waved a hand. "It does not matter. It matters only that the blades are made. Come." He gestured toward the little cellar that had chosen him. "There is a bell with an ugly voice I want you to hear." Ed followed, and Arlen Lygood followed them both with the smooth step of a man stepping across a floor that had not yet been built. The room received them the way rooms do when they have been used enough to be friends. Hake looked at Eddie and then proceeded to ignore him with an intimacy that could be offered only to kin. Gilly hummed once under her breath and pressed her mouth to the child's head. The cracked bell sat upon the bench like a broken tooth that wanted to be a horn. The dark link lay upon the cloth like a sliver of night. Sam placed his hand upon the bell and struck it, lightly. The note was bad. It was bad in exactly the way it needed to be to call the iron to attention. He felt the air gather. He felt the attention he had come to trust move across the room like a large animal. You could not see, but could predict if you had learned its habits. "We will make the first sword," he said quietly, "to the men and to the knife and to the blank that had not yet taken its shape. And we will make it again, and we will teach it the winter's true name." Ed leaned in, his brow furrowed. "You should call them something," he said, out of nowhere, "so that when we say the word in the dark, the men will know what we mean to take up." "Names," Hake muttered, meaning to dismiss. "Later," Sam said, and found that even as he said it, he held a name in his mind that he would not speak yet, because speaking it would give away a piece of what he had gathered to his chest like warmth. He took up the tongs. He took up the bell. He took up the words that were not spells, and the hum that was not a song. He set the iron to light. The river kept its own counsel, moving under the moon with the complacency of a creature that has all the time in the world. The hideout swung its light in its great room. In the rookery the ravens clicked and croaked softly in their sleep. In the candle room, The cold flame burned without burning, and the shadows beyond the arch leaned in as if to listen. Sam held the iron steady and spoke to it the shape of its life. He did not tell it it would be a sword. He told it that men would grasp it in fear and in purpose, that it would be struck against things that did not wish to be ended, that it must not be too proud to bend when bending would keep it from breaking. He told it that it would know the cold and that it must be brave. He told it that the river was a voice and not a thing, and that it must not be a rock. He told it that attention was a thing that could be put into a form, and that that form could be taught to another hand. He told it that it was not special. He told it that being ordinary and correct at scale was a miracle. The blade began to lengthen under hands older than his work. The bell spoke its bad note. The lens cast light that was not colder, but was clear. Gilly hummed. Ed blinked as if soot had gotten in his eye, and then wiped his face with the back of his hand, and did not speak. Arlen Lygood understood that he was involved in something that would raise beyond him, and smiled, as men smile when they secure a house corner and imagine, briefly, that they have secured the weather. When at last the blade was quenched and the steam rose and the room dropped the heat it had been holding, and the night stepped back in through the cracks to reclaim its places, Sam put his hand to the metal and felt, in that small contact, an answer that was not a victory, but was a promise. He allowed himself to breathe and to be grateful to his body for continuing to oblige. He set the blade upon the bricks and sat and let his head fall forward as the bells of the Hightower counted the hour with their patient insistence that men keep track. Another, Hake said because he hated a silence that might try to convince him to feel more than he wished. Another, Sam repeated, and the word lay on his tongue like bread. He would make 1,000 if the world would let him. He would teach men he had never met to make them. He would put the notes of the cracked bell in 100 rooms. He would keep his chain and keep his stubbornness in equal measure, and when Ebros told him to mind the drains, he would nod, and then he would mind the drain that ran through the world from winter's lip to men's throats. He would be, for as long as his doubtful courage held, a small hinge upon which the door might move. He would try, Gods be good, he would try, to open it toward morning.